Norm Kaplan's Christmas. He was never written up in Reader's Digest as one of the most unforgettable characters, but he surely could have been. I'd met him casually before, but we really became friendly after he backed his big battered yellow school bus into my cherished '62 Mercedes sedan. Norm had founded and was the executive director of the Foundation for the Junior Blind in Los Angeles, which, so far as I know, is still going strong as his legacy. It was essentially his life's work, a school for blind and multi-handicapped children and adults. We first heard about Norm when our adopted daughter Kazuko worked for him as a counselor one summer at Camp Bloomfield in Malibu, which was also Norm's baby, his pride and joy. He loved it there. Cher's disfigured son in the 1985 movie Mask, played by Eric Stoltz, was based on one of Norm's real-life campers. I was producing an episode of The Bold Ones, suggested by research involving an experimental vision substitution system, which presumably would allow the trained blind people to see with camera-produced imprints on their backs. The hope was that eventually the system could be miniaturized and built into eyeglass frames, or sewn inside clothing. That is, if the research funds lasted long enough. The story involved a beautiful model with a neurological problem, played by Tisha Sterling, and a young blind boy who was the subject of the experiment. Norm consented to having one of his students, an untrained actor, try out for the boy's part, and he was terrific, unassuming and natural. Since our onstage experiment was a replica and the research funds soon ran out, we were, unfortunately, never able to have him try out for the real equipment. But he was encouraged, I think, by the concept. The deal was that we would include every student we could manage in the film, so we wouldn't appear to show any favoritism. We created a scene where a bunch of Norm's kids played baseball by sound, and he herded them all out to a field on the Universal backlot, and that's when he backed his bus into my Mercedes. It was the beginning of our long, somewhat hectic relationship, including the 1 year when I went to work for Norm as his assistant. He had a way of recruiting and enlisting people. Deborah, Melissa, Robin, and Susan worked for Norm, too. Our girls as camp counselors and Deborah as a family therapist. Susan recalls her deaf campers resented her somewhat for not being able to sign. A highlight that year was an abridged production of Fiddler on the Roof, featuring all the Foundation kids, which I filmed with a pickup college crew. Some days, Deborah and I were at the Foundation together. She was great with the kids and their parents. A few were difficult, and some were demanding, and one day, Deborah was rushing to an appointment when one of the most demanding kids approached from the far end of the long main corridor. Hoping to forestall an assault until she could arrange adequate time, Deborah pretended to limp to disguise her identity. The blind kid approached. She hesitated a moment, then exclaimed, "Deborah, what's wrong with your leg?" Early on, we were welcomed into Norm and Nadia Kaplan's extended family. Norm was short, stocky, and outspoken, particularly on behalf of his kids. With a handsome, two-tone gray beard and a persistent glint in his eye. Nadia was and still is lovely, vivacious, warm, and resilient. A retired teacher and talented writer who appeared content to remain in Norm's shadow, but was clearly very much her own person. They lived in a wonderful, rambling old house on Fanning Street in the wonderful, rambling old Silver Lake district of L.A., with a view of the lake, a small indoor swimming pool on one level, and a seemingly endless number of interconnected rooms. For quite a while, they had a pet monkey, which was a featured attraction. The Kaplan's Christmas parties were legendary, crowded, noisy, filled with music and fun. Early on, Norm himself was the surprise Santa Claus, since he had the perfect build for it. He was hardly a surprise. Later, he committed volunteers well in advance, and the parties took on personality of each respective Santa. But none had Norm's authenticity. When it was his turn, tall, lanky David Hartman was not much of a surprise either. Somehow, the Kaplans always managed presents for everyone. Each was carefully chosen for a particular person and beautifully wrapped. There were usually dozens of guests of all ages. Much too soon, we and our kids began to outgrow the Kaplan Christmases. We tried to keep in touch, but we lost track of many friends from the Foundation until we learned of Norm's death. We reunited for the memorial service on a balmy day, under a canopy on the Foundation grounds. There was a big turnout, and a celebratory one. There were new buildings, new students, new programs, new staff members, and many accomplished graduates who greeted one another with mixed emotions, but in good spirits, as Norm would have wished. Their attendance and achievements spoke eloquently of Norm's lifelong dedication, and wherever Deborah and I go, we often run into people whose lives he touched and to whom he gave a special kind of vision.